Hey guys, welcome back to the Performance Playbook. Today I've got Michael Rubino with us. Michael, how you doing?
I'm doing really good. Thanks for having me.
Just so people can kind of know what you do, can you kind of explain your background and what you've been doing for people?
Yeah, so I'm an air quality expert, and my primal focus is creating healthy environments for people, usually in the residential space and a little bit of the commercial world as well. And, unfortunately, people don't realize that they take 20,000 breaths per day. The breath is so important, right? We can't go more than a few minutes without air. And the greatest route of exposure, unfortunately, for pretty much anything that creates illness is going to be through air exchange. So that breath and what we're breathing in is extremely, extremely important to performance and overall health and well-being.
Yeah, it's funny. I found your content on Instagram, and so I'm swiping through, and you're talking about mold, and I'm like, damn, dude. So much mold is around my sport of diving. Funny enough, just because I don't know if you've seen it, but like our sport has those little tiny chamois, those little
Mm-hmm.
towels we use, and
Yep.
we travel with them everywhere. And I used to just take a wet chamois and shove it in this little container, and then it would start smelling funky and smelling kind of weird. And I'm like, like it was probably mold, but meh, I didn't really think about it. And then
Yeah.
I start to like see your content. And I was like, ah, shit, like that's actually horrible because I'm taking that and rubbing it all over my body. I'm putting it on my face. What does daily exposure look like for people when they're getting consistently hit with mold?
Yeah. So first off, what you did was you created a gigantic petri dish in your chamois, and you have to look at mold and bacteria, right? Because both those things can commonly occur with a little bit of water, and of course, when it's wet and it goes in there, it's going to create that perfect storm. Exposure is twofold for you in this case because you have your dermal exposure, which is through the skin, one of the largest organs we have. And then you also have the particles coming off of the chamois that are entering your breathing zone and entering with every breath that you take. And when you talk about breathing, it's really a twofold aspect because you have the deposits that get into the lungs, but then something like mold or bacteria or viruses, these are so small, they bypass our self defense mechanism and then they enter our bloodstream where they're then carried through the gut. So now we have, pretty much anything you inhale then also typically gets ingested, especially when it's so small. So now we're getting hit with a double whammy where we're having gut issues and inflammation and all these kinds of things. So it's the exposure is very real and it's very important, and again kind of bringing us back home to that central theme of we breathe and the breath is so important. um, it's really crazy to me how we're not thinking about that more clearly.
Yeah, and I think that's another thing that I've been very obsessed with recently is kind of just getting a very healthy home. I've been starting to read Darren O'Lean's book that he just came out with, and you're reading about all these toxins that are coming from everywhere, and like all of the again, you look at your shampoos and your conditioners, and then I start listening to content from you, and now there's potentially mold just spread throughout my whole house in these damp and dark areas, and how it might be affecting me, and so people might feel overwhelmed, but what would be your kind of first step for someone to just start poking at all these things?
All right, so without even spending a penny, one of the best ways to look at your house is actually going over to your toilet tank.
Mm,
Take the cover off, take the lid off, flip it over, look at the underside of the lid, look inside the toilet tank. If you see an abundance of mold growing in that tank, it usually tells us opportunistically it's getting in from somewhere nearby, right? So some of us might have one bathroom, some of us might have three bathrooms. Go over to your bathrooms and take a look. But if you want a more scientific approach, which is what I like, the dust test is probably the best starter entry way to understanding what your environment looks like. Because as a screening tool, you're collecting dust from various locations across your house and you're looking for abnormalities. And the specificity is amazing. It tells you 36 different molds. It tells you different mycotoxins or even endotoxins, which are toxins created by bacteria as bacteria dies off. And you're looking for this perspective of, is this a normal level or an abnormal level? And furthermore, how abnormal? Because it can tell you, is it 10 times abnormal, 100 times, or 1,000 times? And I think from there you can really start to draw parallels around what's going on. Sometimes it's minor stuff. I just need to clean my HVAC. Sometimes it's major stuff. Like I got to open up a wall and remediate it properly.
Yeah. Yeah, because then I start to think about, because it's probably not great to take out everything, right? Like for humans, we need some bacteria, but I guess it's the over consumption of these bacteria when it's in your house, and so it's like that micro dose of it every single day, kind of tapping at you, right?
I mean, do you ever hear that phrase, too much of anything will kill you, right? So if you have one cup of coffee, it acts as a stimulant, right? And we get the caffeine rush, we feel good, we go about our day. But if I have 100 cups of coffee, my heart's going to stop, right? And so, it's so true about anything. You want to have a balance in life. And with microbiology, and we're talking about biological particles and organisms here, we want a balanced microbiome. So we want to have a balance of these things. We don't want to have too much in our environment where our body has to fight tooth and nail to remove it. And that, by the way, is really hard to do, because if you're living inside the problem, it's like you could take all the supplements in the world, but every time you take a breath 20,000 times a day, if you're just inhaling more and more of this stuff, your body can never actually get to a place where it can get rid of it. And I think that's unfortunately where so many people lie in that realm. You're looking at the data of the last HUD and EPA study. So they did a study using PCR technology, screening homes. In 2000, I think it was 2006 was the first study. And in 2006, we already saw that a lot of homes were affected. Way more than 50% of the homes had abnormal levels of mold, for example. Well, in 2019, we're seeing some species increase to prevalence of like 97%, 100%, right? So we're going in the wrong direction, and I understand why, based upon, dissecting buildings myself and seeing how things are built and where we're headed. But the reality of the situation is it's not getting better, right? Because we're not aware of it. Air is invisible. We're not thinking about all the things we're inhaling because we can't see them, right? So when we come to that perspective of how does this shape the way in which we live today? Well, 60% of the global population deals with at least one chronic condition. 40% of the global population deals with multiple chronic conditions. That number has steadily increased over the decades. So I'd say we're trending in the wrong direction, unfortunately. And how does this affect performance? Well, a good buddy of mine, Logan Ryan, is a two-time Super Bowl champ. He knows about air quality because of me, right? I would say that, it extremely affects performance, because if you think about how important the breath is, well, if you're breathing in toxins all day, what do you think your lung capacity is going to look like? If you're breathing in toxins all day, how often are you going to get sick? Think about Patrick Mahomes a couple weeks ago had a horrible game because he had the flu, right? If you're more prone to illness because your immune system's overloaded with all the crap that we're breathing in, how does that affect our performance? Not in a good way, for sure.
Yeah, I think that was one big reason why I was so excited to get you on, because people don't think about this. Like, you're having a mold guy on, or like, like why would you do that? You said it's a performance podcast. I'm like, when you go home, which you're at most of the time, your environment like affects you dramatically. And again, you see that when it comes to sleep and the food you intake. It's actually more so your performance is based on the external things that you're doing outside of just your sport. And so I just found it like super interesting to, pull you on and start to see, all right, like how can we fix things up? One piece that I was interested in is, if we're looking at air quality, how much does it affect our air quality if we have one dog, one cat, multiple animals? Is that really something we have to kind of pay attention to?
Well, I mean, animals do give off pet dander, of course. There's also animal proteins, that usually is what typically develops an allergy, right? You're allergic to the animal proteins that particular dog or cat gives off. So you have that aspect, right? And if you have an abundance of dog hair and cat hair, that your body's lungs acting as your air filter, no, certainly you're going to have some effect, and you might notice an increase of sneezing and coughing. You might notice an increase in allergic reactions and things of that nature. But I think how does it affect the overall air quality? I think the good news is a lot of the particles that emanate from our animals, they're larger particles, right? These larger particles that our body naturally does filter out. So that is a piece of good news. Um, the bad news is that even larger particles, right, can lessen the quality of air that you're breathing if there's an abundance of them. So if I have a dog or cat, which I don't, I would be cleaning a lot more often than I typically do, right? And I'm sure any animal owner has that reaction where they're having to vacuum and clean their couches probably a lot more frequently than if they didn't have a dog or cat, right? I think also if I had a dog or a cat, I would probably invest a little more in air purification systems too, because they're going to take a lot of that airborne hair, animal proteins, pet dander, etc., out of the environment, which makes cleaning a lot easier too. And so those are some of the things I would be thinking about. But what we really have to focus on with respects to air quality, honestly, besides the accumulation of dust and animal hair and things of that nature, we have to worry about the stuff that we can't even see, the stuff that is 25 to 50 times smaller than what the eye can see, or even more, the stuff that is smaller than 10 microns in particle size, because that's the magic number. Below that threshold, it seems to be able to bypass our self-defense mechanisms more easily. So if you go to like the American Lung Association website, you'll see they'll say size matters. Anything smaller than 10 microns, that poses the greatest health risk. Well, what's smaller than 10 microns? Mold, bacteria, viruses, toxins. These are the things that we want to be more concerned about. And I think technology has moved in a great direction for us to be able to identify these things and then help trace us to figure out where they're coming from. So it's the things you can't see. And I think that's what makes it so tricky because we can't see them.
Yeah. Is there some standard practices that you think would benefit? You see the Japanese are very big on taking their shoes off before they come into the house so they're not just like spreading dirt all over the floor. Is there some stuff like that would help?
Well, yeah, I think there's a couple things that we need to probably do. First off, yes, taking your shoes off at the front door is really crucial.
Yeah.
Right now I'm wearing socks in my house. I'm not wearing shoes. And the big thing is because we actually pick up so much bacteria as we move about in the world. Um, there's an abundance of mold and bacteria in the soil. Most people don't realize that, right?
Mm.
So you're walking around, you're on the grass, you're in the dirt, you're on pavement, you're picking stuff up, and to bring that into your house and walk around with that is not a great idea, right? We talked about earlier, it's good to have some level of stuff in there to get your body used to it and get your immune system going. But the amount of stuff that we could bring into our home just by bringing our shoes on, that's enough to create an issue, especially if we have other conditions like high humidity or water damage, where some of the stuff we're bringing in can start to grow and take form. The modern HVAC system's another issue because it always condensates, right? It's why we have drain lines that take the water from the HVAC unit outside our house. And so if we're thinking about from that perspective, whatever we bring in, if it gets sucked into the HVAC system, it can start to grow in the HVAC system. And now it's a mold or a bacteria factory, right? And it's constantly creating particles that are affecting our air quality and affecting our body. So I think that's a thing to think about. The other thing is like, washing our bedding within a week. Okay. Our pillowcase, if you tested our pillowcase a week after we've been sleeping on it, look, we sweat, we drool. This creates water content in our bedding that allows things like mold and bacteria to take shape. We also have to remember we're human beings. We are a pretty large host of bacteria, of viruses. And so if we're sweating and we already have bacteria inside of us, on our skin, it's very easy for that to transfer and start growing in things like our pillows, in things like our sheets and bedding. Within a week, your pillowcase can be 17,000 times more contaminated than your toilet seat. So, it's things to keep in mind. And why is that? Because your pillowcase is porous. Your toilet seat is not. You would think the toilet seat's got to be the dirtiest place in the house. Sometimes it's not by a far margin. So we have to look at things like what's porous, what's non-porous, what can we wipe down, what has to go into the washing machine. And we have to be more cognizant of that. And I think, washing your pillowcases, your pillows, your bedding more frequently, like maybe a little bit more than once a week, seeing what the latest studies have been suggesting,
Okay.
is going to be a good move. So I think between that, taking our shoes off of the front door, those are two major changes we can do that can make a massive difference today with no money down here.
Yeah. Also heard that your um your shower towel that you usually use is actually one of the worst places that you could also have a bunch of bacteria because it's wet and then hopefully it's drying off enough. But then by the time you're using it again, so it just keeps accumulating. Is that something that's a big red flag for you too?
Yeah, because your towel is never really fully dry. Go use a towel tonight. Go go use it again tomorrow morning. It's already still damp from the night before, and then you're using it again. And yes, that process reciprocates, and of course, it does make a big difference if you already have mold or bacteria abundantly in your home, just because you've had some water damage or you've created some opportunities for that to exist. Then yes, your towel is probably going to get a lot more contaminated a lot more quickly because you already have it in the environment. Look at it from this perspective. If you think of mold and bacteria as kind of like a weed, right? You know how when you have weeds in your yard, they produce seeds.
Yeah.
And so you yank the weed, the seeds fall in the dirt, and a week later you've got new weeds, right? And it's like this perpetual problem. Well, that's kind of the same thing with mold and bacteria. They produce seeds called spores.
Mm.
And as you remove the organism, it's constantly generating spores, and now the spores are left in place. So if you don't resolve water issues in the home or humidity problems or moisture problems, those seeds become a full-blown organism again, right? So we're always in this perpetual race to kind of control the environment, and doing it in totality so that we don't consistently have these reoccurring issues. And I think that plays a big important role into how we have moldy stuff in the house, like our chamois, like our
Yeah.
towels. If we control our environment a little better, we'll have a little more grace with those things.
Yeah. And so would you suggest someone, so for bed sheets and specifically it sounds like the pillowcase itself, maybe you're washing that twice a week and then the towels, maybe are you circulating it every 2, 3 days to kind of keep that as dry as possible?
Yeah, I pretty much have like a 3-day max
3 day
on the
max.
towels.
Okay.
So every time, and that's maybe usually 2 times minimum, 3 times maximum, I would say. So 2 to 3 times I would use it before it goes into the hamper to be washed and a new towel. Yeah, we have to change them. I mean, towels for sure, they're going to get a lot more wet than your pillowcases, than your sheets are, right? So if I'm washing my towels every 2 to 3 days, yeah, you want to start to put in perspective, maybe make like changing your sheets a 4-day maximum.
Mm, okay. Yeah, it's kind of crazy to think about because then it's like, well, if we go deeper, and this was something I was kind of obsessed with a little while back, but it's take out the bedding, but what about the bed itself? And so again, I'm starting to see things to where it's like, hey, you actually should be like vacuuming or trying to find a way to pull out the dirt in the bed itself. And I actually just did that this Sunday and was blown away on how much dirt I actually pulled out of my bed. I was like, what's going like I have a protector on top of it. How's this shit still getting through? Is that again like do you have a certain type of mattress that you use or what does that look like?
So, yeah, I mean, there's all kinds of technologies. There's like, latex mattress, which again is non-porous, so you don't really get a collection of things. But not some people are allergic to latex, and there's other issues with latex and off gases and things of that nature. So I think the emphasis is if you're gonna get a specific material, think about the material you're getting and think about how to protect it, right? So, for example, I have a traditional mattress. I don't even remember the brand. One of these brands you would see and get anywhere, right? But I have a mattress cover that actually zips up. That's 100% waterproof. And so, listen, I'm 35 years old. I'm not wetting the bed, but I know that I'm going to sweat. I know that I'm going to drool. I can't help it. We're human beings. So I want to make sure my mattress is protected because I know if water, sweat, bacteria seeps into the mattress, most people don't change their mattresses for years at a time.
Yeah.
And so, unfortunately, if you're not coming up with some strategy to preserve that mattress, you wait years, that thing might be a crazy mold and bacteria factory, and you have no idea, right? Because one of the things we observe as human beings when something's off is smell, right? But if you're sleeping on something for 8 hours a day, odds are you're probably going to get pretty used to it. And that smell is going to become normal to your olfactory senses. And you're going to kind of just associate it with that's just the way my mattress smells instead of, whoa, this is a problem. Now, your chamois, you notice pretty much right away because that started to change. The next day you go to put it on, you're like, whoa, this isn't normal, right? But when you're sleeping on something 8 hours a day, it's changing as you're sleeping. So you're adapting it over time. There's a runway of time there. It's kind of like a lot of my clients will tell me, I got an issue with my house, and here's how I know. I went away on vacation for like the first time in a few months, and I came back and I was like, holy crap, this is the way my house smells. It smells horrible. It's like you get so used to it over time that it just becomes normal to you, and you don't realize until you take yourself out of that situation and come back that you realize, okay, wow, this is a bit off.
Yeah. I didn't know. So one thing that I was leaning into for a little bit was the just completely 100% cotton, like the Japanese mattresses. Those were interesting to me because you see their old practices. I feel like the Japanese are just perfect at everything, but they would every couple of days they'd pick up the mattress and beat the crap out of it, so everything would kind of like fall out. Has that been like ever something that's interested in you and kind of like sparked your interest when it comes to like bypassing mold and bacteria?
I mean, listen, I think I'm always interested in figuring out how to bypass mold and bacteria. Cotton is great. We make clothes out of cotton for a reason. It dries pretty quick, right? And I think that's the real big key is how fast does something dry? Mold and bacteria typically start to replicate in about 24 to 48 hours, right? And so if something is wet for a longer period of time than that, odds are you're going to start to see some mold and bacteria development. And I think, you want to pick a material that is either going to A, not absorb moisture that well at all, or B, if it absorbs moisture, it's going to dry rather quickly. And of course, like there's variables to this. Someone may sweat more than another person, and it might be a bigger problem for them. But I think like for me, because I don't have one of these 100% cotton mattresses, that can dry quicker, my goal was protect it. I'll tell you what, even if I did get a cotton mattress, I would still put it in the same waterproof mattress cover I'd rather always have a fail safe in place than not.
Yeah, for sure. And so then it's you take out, let's walk away from the bedding, um, your food. And I think specifically, I never heard about this until recently again, was coffee mold. Can you kind of go over that? Because that was something I was like, wait, what? Coffee mold? What's going on here?
Yeah, so coffee mold. Well, you have to look at coffee and how it's processed. You have to look at grains and how they're processed. These things are typically stored in not dry, humid environments, and they're usually stored in humid and dark environments, which you have moisture, and then you have, darkness. You're typically going to have mold. I mean, it's like one of the two things that it loves. And it can feed off of the food source itself, right? And so coffee has been one of those things that have been tried and tested where it gets moldy, unfortunately, unless somebody is specifically doing something to the coffee to make sure it doesn't get moldy, like humidity controls. Now, coffee has been tested. Dave Asprey is like one of the godfathers of the mold and coffee uh, realization, if you will. But he started testing coffees and started seeing that they had high levels of mycotoxins, right? And when his quest to get healthier himself, and obviously, he realized, wow, as Americans, we drink a ton of coffee, and if our coffee is not coming from a good location or a good source, we're going to be taking in all this mold and mycotoxins, which is a toxin produced by certain species of mold. Because of that, that's affecting our health. And if you think about how much coffee we drink, maybe the average person 1 to 2 cups, maybe more from there. And of course, some people don't drink coffee, but this can be a pretty big problem. So I think for me, I always go with coffee companies that specifically test for this, that are ethically sourcing coffee that is stored properly, is roasted properly, and it is not having mold exposure issues because it's you can of course get mold contamination from food as well.
Yeah. And so for the average buyer, are we supposed to be kind of more concerned about the ones we're grabbing off the shelf, or is that even the ones we're going to Starbucks and grabbing, or both?
Well, I think that you definitely want to be concerned probably about both, right? Because if the person who's making you pasta or the person who's making you coffee, if they're buying their grains or their coffee beans from a source that is mass producing and doesn't care about mold and doesn't care about their products being contaminated, that's a pretty big problem. When I was in Europe not too long ago, was at a winery, and it went down into the wine cellar where they showed me where the wine was made. And the first thing I noticed was, oh my God, it smells absolutely horrible in here, like mold like you wouldn't believe.
Mm,
And this is stored in these oak barrels. Okay, this wine is stored in these oak barrels, which are semi-porous. Okay, it's humid as heck, right? And it's probably why there's so much mold. And that mold can transfer into these barrels, which then gets bottled up and shipped to us. By the time we drink it, we have no idea what's happening. Now, it made me quickly realize I have to figure out if I want to drink wine, right? I have to figure out who's getting it from a good location or not, because that place that specific wine was stored in, no good. This is the same that holds true for grains and coffee and pretty much anything that gets stored in a place where things are drying and dried out. They have to be well ventilated. They have to have dehumidifiers in place to control the humidity levels. They have to have good natural light where they're not just stored in these dark places. And you have to actually know how to find these people. And I think the best way to do it is find out which brands are specifically testing their sources for mycotoxins. And if you can do that, then that this company actually cares about that specific aspect, and you can do it. Like Dry Farm Wines, for example. It's an entire company that tests their wines for mycotoxins, and the wines come from all over the world. So it's a really cool place to be able to drink wine that is not going to, first off, alcohol is already poison to the body, right? But and we know it and we do it, right? But you don't want to add another layer of toxins to the mix. And I think that's really the crucial key here. And unfortunately, we don't do a good job in the United States regulating these toxins, and we need to do a better job.
yeah. So what would be kind of like a very obvious, and I'd be interested to see what the non-obvious like signs or red flags would be of ingesting mold consistently, let's say from your coffee. But what would be like a very obvious one that we could kind of pick up on?
I would say the most obvious one would be inflammation. Gut inflammation is probably the most obvious one. The funny thing about that is it's not so obvious in terms of, gut inflammation. Obviously, if I have it and I'm the average person, I might not think, oh, I must be around toxins or mold or something to that aspect, because, if you look online, pretty much it's like everything causes gut inflammation these days, right? I always tell people, you know, first off, if you're dealing with inflammation, it's typically environmental. And environmental could be many things. It can be what you eat, it could be what you breathe, right? It could be, supplements that you're taking that aren't working properly. It could be all these different things. It could be what you're putting onto your skin that's getting into your body and causing inflammation. So you have to look at what changed in my environment that would now all of a sudden make me have gut inflammation
Mm.
or some sort of other body inflammation, right? Something always has to change. Of course, injuries can cause inflammation, right? And that's part of injury recovery. But if I didn't bang my knee and I have inflammation in my knee out of nowhere, what changed in my environment that would cause this inflammation? If I have gut inflammation and I never had it before, what changed in my environment, right? And people need to start asking themselves. And when you do ask yourself, you might start to realize something like, oh, I switched this brand of coffee. Oh, I, completely switched my shampoo or conditioner. Or, oh, I had some water damage happen where the roof leaked and I thought it was fixed, but maybe it's not fixed. You start to ask yourself these questions and you start to find answers. I think we've gotten so accustomed in the US to just going to the doctor. Something must be wrong, right? We just go to the doctor. Something's wrong. Doc, what is it? Give me some sort of pill to fix it. Well, if you look at how our medical system is, it's really interesting because these pills don't actually solve any root cause of anything, right?
It's a great Band-Aid. Yeah.
They don't. So like if they did, then that means that I would have an Advil deficiency every time I had a headache. But I don't have an Advil deficiency, do I?
Yeah.
No, I take that to suppress the feeling of the headache. And so what's interesting about this whole mechanism is that something is happening that's causing the headache. Maybe I'm dehydrated, right? Maybe I just need to drink more water. I got to start asking myself, did I drink enough water? Or maybe I went to an environment and got something that is causing this headache, right? I'm dealing with typically some sort of brain inflammation at that point, right? What is causing that? And I think if we have to do a better job just as people, as husbands and fathers and friends and family members, to really understand what we're doing, what we're going through, what other people are going through, and be more supportive through that. Because the reality of it is, if we start building this dependency on pharmaceuticals, we're never actually going to solve the cause of the problems that require us to take this pharmaceutical in the first place. And I think that's a whole other, mindset shift we need as a civilization. And I think if we do that, we realize that the answers are really staring us in the face.
100%. Actually, I have two little pieces here that kind of, you brought up that remind me. Like, recently, my dad was just at my grandmother's house, and she was complaining about her coffee. Funny enough, we were just talking about it. She was complaining about her coffee, and a lot of people have coffee makers at home. And so he actually just went through her entire machine and just cleaned it out. And it took him a whole hour to clean it because it was so bad. And so it's like you're looking at all of these little micro, hits of mold or whatever that may be on a daily basis. And it makes me think, okay, well, you bring up consistent health and going to the medical system. We have this big problem of, maybe poor structures or, just overly humid environments. And then you look at rising mental health that might be going on. Obviously, there's so many other factors there, let that be the phones, you name it. But do you think that the mold in these bacteria could be going straight to the brain and affecting how our hormones work and stuff like that?
Well, I mean, yeah, I mean, there's tons of studies that talk about brain inflammation and how mold and bacteria can cause that, right? And being in a water damaged building would really encompass a lot of mold and bacteria, talking about brain inflammation. Dr. Amen, Dr. Daniel Amen, has really become famous for his brain scans, and he's seeing all kinds of brain inflammation. He knows all about mold. He's talked about mold and how mold can cause some of the things that he's seeing in his brain scans. It's really really interesting, right? Because we're on this whole new technological horizon, putting science and technology together to understand exactly how our environments impact human beings and how the breath plays into that, right? Because we can't stop breathing. That's one thing we know we can't do, right? We stop breathing, we're not alive. So we have to change how we're breathing, right? We have to change what we're breathing. And I think that's really the key. When we talk about mental health, I mean, anxiety and depression are like the first two things that pop up when you start talking about environmental exposures from a mental health perspective. And why is that? Well, many different reasons, right? I would say one of the first and most obvious things is if I don't feel well because I'm dealing with chronic inflammation, and it's like, and if you've ever dealt with this before, you know exactly what I'm talking about here. It's like you could have 10 bad days in a row, right? And you're just like, man, you're going doctor to doctor trying to figure this out. And then you have one or two good days. And when you have those one or two good days, that hope, that beacon of hope, like, oh, maybe, whatever happened, it passed and I'm good. And then boom, you just get knocked on your butt again and you have another 10 bad days. What do you think is going to happen to your mental health at that point? You're going to be like, nothing I can do works,
Yeah.
right? My quality of life sucks. I can barely get my head off that damn pillow. I've had clients that have literally went from climbing Mount Kilimanjaro to in a wheelchair all due to crazy environmental exposures that completely wreck the immune system and body functions, right?
Yeah.
And when you look at it from that perspective, how was that person's mental health? It is amazing that they kept going. And we have to really acknowledge this. I asked myself once, like, I wonder if I went down into the mental institution and did like a study, right? And I picked up everybody who was dealing with some sort of, you know, some sort of mental health issue, and we went and tested their homes, right, where they spent all this time. And we just, as an interesting study, let's see what they're being exposed to. Because the truth of the matter is, in the environment, it plays such an important pivotal role in our body, and our body plays such an important role in our mental health.
Yeah.
It is interconnected, right? It would not strike me as completely insane that this affects our mental health way more than we know today. We know a little bit, but it would not surprise me if this affected us gravely, right? Because if you think about it from this perspective, we've all heard of muscle memory, right? And it's really cell memory. But if our bodies are dealing with exposure when we're a kid and we get out of it, we move into a nice place, 20, 30 years later, we're in a similar exposure. I wonder what sort of stimulus response we would experience. Probably we might start to have anxiety, like, well, we're in this place that was made us sick frequently when we're kids. This is not a good place to be. We might have just random anxiety and depression turn on, right? And the only reason I'm saying this, because I've had clients that are like, I got sick when I was a kid and I know I was in a moldy basement, but I was fine for 20 years, and all of a sudden I'm in a little bit of mold and my body is just shutting down. How could that be? There are so many unknowns to this
Yeah.
that we're still trying to learn. But I'm telling you, I mean, if I'm right the way I think I'm right, this could help us pave the way for better health for future civilizations by just being more aware of the environment and being more in control of it. It's like, this doesn't have to be doom and gloom, of course. The reality of the situation is, if you know something, you could do something about it.
Yep.
Right? Right now, we're not doing anything about air because it's invisible. We're taking 20,000 breaths a day. We're not thinking about the air we're breathing. We're not even thinking to take a breath, right? How many times have you and I been breathing and we haven't even thought about it, right? If we could start to be more intentional and be more aware of these things, then we can do something about it. And if we can do something about it, then we can't be the adverse effect of it. So my goal is why I'm here talking to you today is let's be aware of this. Let's do something about it.
Yeah. It makes me kind of go back and ponder on like the whole pandemic, right? When everyone had to stay at home, and you start to see, and this is kind of based on, I guess there's two different parts here, right? Because everyone's spending a lot of time in their home. And so you are isolated, but you are also locked into a house. And so if that house is just riddled with mold, then, that whole mental health piece again starts to go down. And I'm pretty, someone's going to have to quote me if I'm wrong, but there was as many suicide deaths as COVID deaths. And so you start to see how it's like the locking up into the house itself might have been kind of worse than the actual virus itself. The other piece that I found really interesting, though, is when we all stopped, you saw cities clear up, right? There's less cars driving around. Is there a piece of that to where living in a city like New York is almost a little bit more detrimental for your health?
Well, I think there's a lot of layers to this. First off, um, I noticed in my field that a lot of people got sick being spending so much time at home. And that makes sense based upon the data showing that mold and bacteria problems have gotten worse over the past 13 years inside of homes, right? So homes are getting worse because of the way they're built, and people are spending more time in their homes than ever before, and we start seeing more people get sick. So that's step number one. Number two, what many scientists didn't think about, because again, many scientists aren't thinking about environmental exposures unless they're an environmental exposure scientist. Well, they didn't account for the fact that when people are spending time at home in these buildings, they're going to be more susceptible to viral infections like COVID. Okay. So, I have data from every NFL team right now, and we're in the process of going to be pitching the NFL on the importance of air quality in NFL facilities and different teams. I can tell you which teams get sick. And you would think, oh, it's the teams in the, Northeast that get sick the most and blah, blah, blah. No, it's the teams that are most likely to have mold and bacteria in their facilities based upon the climate that they're in that get sick the most. Isn't that interesting? Now, when you look at it from this perspective of, COVID and the pandemic and staying home and mental health, first off, I would say people that live in New York notoriously are people that want to be into a larger community of people, right? So if I live in New York City, I live in New York City because I want to have 1,000 friends all within a square mile of me that I can see at any given time. I want to be able to go to Broadway plays and be with people. Okay. So if you shut down New York and you shut down a group of people that love to be with people, how do you think that affects their mental health? They no longer can be with people. As a matter of fact, on top of that, the entire community sold you that you could die if you're next to another person within a few feet. I mean, come on. How does that affect someone's mental health? Are you kidding me? You can kill your grandma if you go see her, so don't go see your grandma. I mean, this is ridiculous. It's the most ridiculous thing in the world. Now, listen, there are so many things that we did wrong with the pandemic, and I don't want to make this a whole pandemic, drop thing here. But the reality of the situation is, when I look at it, I always take a very pragmatic and objective approach to a lot of things that I do. I think that, the science community, which is really the government science team, I think they were so scared. There were so many unknowns, okay? And they didn't know what they didn't know. And so it's better to be it's better to be very careful with the information that you put out when you just don't have all the facts, right? They knew that COVID-19 was going to be very infectious, okay? And they knew that certain people, okay, especially people that were in poor air quality environments to begin with, were going to be much more prone to this being a serious issue. So they did I truly believe that they did the best that they could. Knowing what we know today, though, we could have done it better, and I think this helps us set the stage for understanding how we deal with future pandemics. Because look, the reality of the situation is, if we are unhealthy as a civilization, which I've already pointed out, we've never been sicker than we are today. This is not news. Go look it up, right? If we have never been sicker than we are today, well, then any sort of pandemic we're going to deal with in the future is going to knock us out. And I think that's the way we have to start to look at it. I mean, look, people die from the flu. Hundreds of thousands of people die from the flu every year. We don't talk about it, right? The reality of it is, we have to start to be more mindful of air quality so we can be healthier and happier, in a better state of mind, and better prepared to deal with things that are not going away, like viruses and bacteria and mold. And I think if we can do that, we're going to be in a good spot. But right now, we have to just be mindful about the air that we're breathing, because it's invisible, right?
Yeah. I feel like the other piece that I was kind of interested to hear your thoughts on is our water. Is another concern that I feel like a lot of people are starting to bring up. And, they're telling you, hey, make sure you're at least filtering your water or buying from trusted sources that are coming in, glass cases. And then you even see our water systems, and you've seen kind of the photos of the pipes and how disgusting they look. Is that kind of another major concern? Because sure, you open your faucet and hopefully it comes out clear, but it still might be super toxic for you.
Oh yeah, water. Water is a interesting thing. So water, we basically use chemicals to kill off bacteria and then pump it through our piping systems, right? And that's how we get water delivered to our faucets. Um, Depending on where you live, that's a big part of this. I'm sure you've heard of the disaster in Flint, Michigan, right? Where that water was literally toxic, where the entire town was like, don't use your water. Um, These things happen. Water systems are running through pipes sometimes hundreds of years old. And what do you think they're going to pick up? They're going to pick up all kinds of heavy metals and contaminants as it runs through the system and gets to your faucet. So I think water filtration systems are a good idea. You know, I have a whole home filtration system. I still don't drink out of the faucet. I have water, fresh water delivered to our house every, I think, other week or something to that effect. And we have a water dispenser. Um, there are great filtration systems out there that you can install into your kitchen, underneath the sink or somewhat, that you don't even need to have water delivered. But for me, it's just another device that could leak. So I'd rather just have it delivered, right? Um, but I think water is really important. You know, many of us don't drink enough water. You know, and I'm probably a culprit of this too. I have to constantly remind myself to drink water. Did I drink enough water today? I tell you right now, I didn't drink enough water so far today. So when I hang up with you, I'm going to drink some water. Um, you know, and the quality of water that we drink is important, especially when we don't drink enough of it. We got to drink, good quality water. We're going to be introducing a lot of chemicals and toxins into our body that way as well. So I think it's another really important aspect, but I will still argue with you until the cows come home that I'm way more concerned about the air we breathe because of how much air we consume. You know, the average person consumes enough air, enough gallons of air every single day to fill up a normal sized swimming pool.
Mm,
I
I did
mean,
not know that.
you're not drinking enough that much water. I can promise you that, but you're consuming that much air, and so and that's why it's pretty much the greatest route of exposure for anything out there that causes disease, and that's why I think we want to be more mindful of it.
Yeah. So just forcing you to stick on the water for a little bit. Again, you kind of walk back. Okay, so we try to filter our water or buy from smart places, and now we see a lot of people trying to get away from plastic. And so with us trying to get away from plastic, now we're using these jars or whatever you want to use to hold a lot of these or all of your water and you name it. But they're dark and they're hard to clean. Do you even use water bottles? What does that look like? I know there's some companies now, and this is one of them. Lark. I don't know if you've ever heard of that.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, I've heard of them.
So I don't know if that's a big scam for you or what that looks like, but what's your usage look like?
Well, I mean, no, UV light technology has been great for bacteria. It's in hospitals, it's been studied. I think it's a great technology to be in a water bottle. You just, I have never seen Lark. They've contacted me once to potentially do a campaign. I never got to see their product or anything like that. It really comes down to the fact, is it cleanable? How well can you clean it? And I think that's the key because when you look at a lot of water devices, like different water bottles and things of that nature, they all have rubber gaskets in them. The rubber gasket keeps it from spilling. So when you look at like spill proof technology, that always scares me because anytime you introduce a rubber gasket, you can trap moisture between the rubber gasket and the metal or the plastic or whatever it's made out of. And that's where you'll start to get mold and bacteria to grow. So I always look for things when I'm buying something that can fully come apart, even the rubber gasket, something that can fully be taken apart and allowed to really be cleaned and really dry before it all gets put back together. That's the key. So, kids sippy cups. Oh my goodness, you wouldn't believe. I'm sure you've seen all through the news and media. Kids bath toys, kids sippy cups. You
Yeah,
cut
yeah.
those things open and they're like mold factories and they're gross and disgusting. Well, that's because a lot of these are made where they don't separate the rubber gasket, right? So, my kids are getting older now and they're not really drinking out of sippy cups like that anymore. But all the ones that we ever had, there were these silicone pieces, but they would pop off and you would be able to completely clean them and be able to make sure they completely dry. There was no sort of trap moisture potential between the different things. So, the Stanley cups and all these different cups out there, and there's just, hundreds of products that come out every day. You just want to make sure when you're buying something like that, the key question is, can I take it apart? Can I fully clean it? And can I fully dry it?
Okay. Yeah, that's interesting because then again, it's so many people are just like, well, if I can't see it, it's not there. I'm not being affected by it. But being able to, break it apart is really probably pretty important. The other thing I did want to touch on, just because we lightly touched on coffee, but what is a good sign for people to know, or some indicators that maybe their food outside of their coffee is moldy, and how can they bypass that?
Yeah, I think some of the more obvious things to look at is like, does it look like it has mold growing on it? I think if it's not a cheese that's supposed to be moldy and it's moldy, then that's not good. You want to throw it away, right?
Mm.
If it is bread and you start seeing some mold spots on it, a lot of people, especially like, our parents and grandparents, they used to just like cut the mold off the bread and just eat the rest of the bread. And what we have to understand about mold and bacteria is they typically have filaments that grow into things. So you may have just cut like the surface of the spot off, but it's got a network of roots that are growing into the bread, which you're eating. And so you're still consuming mold at that point, right? So if you see mold growing on food, you should throw it away. If it smells funky, then it's probably got mold or bacteria, right? So if I'm taking something out of the fridge and it smells off, I'm gonna throw it away. I think it should be really that obvious, right? With when it comes to food, but sometimes we're in a rush. We're not looking. We throw stuff in. I actually, the coffee thing is hilarious for me because it happened to me. I went away for a weekend. I come back. I forgot to clean out the coffee maker. I go to use it. I take a sip and I literally spit it, like projectile spit it out of my mouth. Tasted like mold. I'm like, you got to be kidding me. I take apart the coffee machine, mold everywhere. And I'm like, oh shit. I left the entire water reservoir there. I left wet coffee grinds there. Like stuff I would normally not do, but like I was rushing and went away for the weekend and forgot. And look, we're human beings. We're allowed to make mistakes. I had to throw the whole coffee machine away because unfortunately this one was not, you were not able to take it apart and clean it as thoroughly as I would have needed to at that point. So, it's so important to kind of be mindful of these things. But if you taste it, if you smell it, if it looks weird, you should just toss it, not take up the chance. Also, like, look at the sell by date. Most foods, they're really not meant to be consumed more than a week after the sell by date. And there is a difference between the sell by date and expiration date. Sell by date means like consume it within a week of this date. And the expiration date means like it is expired on this date, right? Do not eat it past this date. So you really want to look at that. And of course, like I don't care if it says it's not going to expire for 3 months. I always smell it to be safe and take a look at it before I consume it.
Yeah. I guess I feel like the reason why I was asking, because I feel like not that we're getting lazy, but similar to the bread, right? You see it on the top, you're like, oh, let me just rip that piece off. I feel like it more so happens with fruit. If you're buying fresh fruit and you're like, oh, well, this one has a little bit of mold, I'll just throw that one out and eat the rest. Do we assume that they're all screwed just because we've seen one or two of them with it? Like, is that just like, hey, the whole thing, it's done?
Yeah, because think about what is your fruit? Your fruit is a lot of water content, right? So it starts growing on one berry. It's starting to grow amongst the other berries, right? And so you just tossed a one or two berries and eat the rest of the berries, you're probably consuming some mold at that point. Yeah. You definitely like if you start to see mold growing in the berries, it's already too late. And you also have to remember when I bought these berries, there was no mold, right? Now there's mold. So it wasn't like I bought the berries and there was two moldy berries from the factory that got brought into my basket. And if I just toss those two, I'm good. No, that mold started growing in that container amongst those berries. And so it's already in the berries, right? And so if you're going to eat it, you're at risk. Um, there's actually a great video on Science Direct. I think it's like sciencedirect.com or something. You type in like moldy bread, and it's like this whole animated video about why you should never, just remove mold from some portion of the food and eat the rest.
Okay. Yeah. That's one big thing that I've done a lot, and I was like, I don't necessarily know if this is good or bad, but this is something I've done for quite a bit, so
Yeah.
I can know to cut that out. I feel like one big piece people are going to be sitting here waiting for is, okay, so we've addressed where to find the mold, what it looks like, what it smells like, how to try to, mitigate it, but how do we kill it and get it out?
Well, the tricky thing about mold specifically is the goal is not to just kill it. Mold is like an insidious weed, right? What happens if you go and spray weed killer out in your lawn? It's going to come right back.
Yeah.
Same thing with mold. If you just try to spray some products on it to kill it, it's going to come right back because you're not solving the root cause of conditions that allowed it to grow in the first place, right? And so sometimes people have mold problems because the humidity is too high. You need a dehumidifier. Then you need to safely remove the mold. So if we know that mold grows into bread, think about what it's doing into your wall. Your wall is porous. It's going to grow into the wall. So if you just clean it off the surface, it's going to come back in just a couple of days. Why? Because it's already rooted into the material. It'd be like going into your yard and just cutting the weed from the stem. It's going to come right back. That's what I say. You got to pull the roots out, right? Well, how do you pull the roots out when the roots are in your wall? You have to, you have to actually remove parts of the wall. And so unfortunately, like remediation is typically needed when you have mold problems in your house because you have to look at it like, well, how is it coming? How is it growing in the first place? That has to be corrected. I got to remove the mold. The mold's growing in the wall. It's in the insulation. It's on the 2x4s behind the wall. Like all that needs to be carefully removed. And, don't just throw bleach on it and don't just paint over it or you're going to still be breathing that stuff in.
Yeah, I guess that was one of the things I wanted to bring up because that was one of your most recent videos was talking about bleach and it being not useless or just not a great way of getting rid of the mold.
Well, which means it's kind of useless in that regard, right? Because like what we realized is bleach doesn't kill mold, and it bleaches it, so it makes it harder to see. So you think it's gone, but it's not dead. It's not gone. Again, the cause of it growing is not gone, and so it's going to grow back. So, no, we don't want to use bleach. That's probably the worst thing. We also don't know if bleach causes it to, because the toxins that it produces is more of a self-defense mechanism. I would suspect that if you tried killing something with bleach, it's probably going to respond by creating toxins. So I think there's a lot safer methods out there. There's botanical options to disinfect these days that help us remove viruses and bacteria and mold and all the things. So I would say, let's throw away bleach. Let's throw away painting over mold as an idea. Let's figure out what's causing it and really fix it once and for all.
Okay. Because again, like most of us are, for me, for example, I'm pretty sure I've got some tasty mold in my shower. So does that just mean, okay, hey, I need to actually kick on the fan in here every time I'm showering, keep it on for an extended period of time. And then if that's not doing enough of its job, then we got to bring in something like a dehumidifier.
Exactly. So, exhaust fans take out the moisture, obviously. We want to take out the moisture. And so it's really important to run that exhaust fan. But listen, in a bathroom, we probably all should be having dehumidifiers. And especially if we live in, humid climates, we want to think about having dehumidifiers in our houses overall.
Yeah, got it. Well, hey, thank you for your time. I really appreciate it. It's been a very fun podcast, and hopefully everyone can kind of take away what I have, which is we got to get rid of it, but make sure it's mitigated in the best way possible.
Yes, this was a blast. Thank you so much for having me, and I hope people learned a lot.
Thank you.